You know, right. The podcast that uncovers the origin stories of some of the biggest names in sports, media, entertainment, entrepreneurship, authors, and so much more. Nick Durst here, along with Joe Calabrese. And Joe, we have a great guest for our audience today. I know you're very excited. The two of you are probably very on the same wavelengths when it comes to being spiritually intertwined and whatnot. So we're going to uncover all that. Tell everybody who we have with us here today.
Yeah, we're gonna beat it over your head and get you on board finally. But our guest today is leading expert on personal growth and human evolution. He's the CEO of David Bayer Businesses. Their mission is to basically turn individual personal journeys of trial and tribulation and transmute that into eventual business success. He's had a prolific career in entrepreneurship and has been a leader at any venture that he's taken part in. He recently became an author. His book, A Changed Mind, Go Beyond Self-Awareness, Rewire Your Brain and Engineer Your Reality. You can buy it anywhere. You can buy it on Amazon. So we'll get to pick his brain about his book a little bit. But we welcome David Bayer to the show. David, welcome. How are you?
Joe, Nick, it's awesome to be here. I appreciate it. I didn't know that we were going to have a conversion experience for Nick, so this is a good frame for that.
I have something. Wait, no. I have something to start out with. Just this morning, a recent interview that we did was exactly 11 minutes and 11 seconds, and Nick said, I forgot what he said, but it basically didn't work for him, and he paid no mind to it. So right off the bat, Dave, we gotta explain to him how that is a meaningful sync in his life.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up. It makes me feel like I'm becoming like an Angels number guy when we talk about it. But you know, the number I pay attention to is 33, and it's probably by no coincidence that yesterday my wife finally said, "Have you seen how many 33s we've run into on the road?"
Nick is a 33 life path too.
Am I?
33 life path.
He's a master manifester, and he doesn't even know it.
He doesn't even know it.
Gets in his own way. We got to teach him.
Well, hopefully we will. We've got enough time, but it really is wild because it's not as if, you know, I'll be driving on the highway, not paying attention to a single car for an entire hour, and then happen to glance to the right as, you know, a 33 drives by. So I do think there is something, not that we necessarily want to dive super deep into it, because I know part of what you were saying was tongue in cheek, Joe, but you know, everything is vibration, everything is resonance. There's a magnetic quality to it. And I think whether it's a 33 or whether it's a hummingbird or whatever it is that you sort of decide is an indicator for you that, you know, of good luck or that you're on the path, I think there is an intelligence in the universe that certainly has the capacity to have those things show up to remind us that we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I was kind of buying in. I kept seeing 11-11 for about 2 weeks, and then I just said to my wife, I sounded out. I think this is like a warning sign for me. Something bad's going to happen. The next day, something bad did happen. So I don't know. For me, I think it kind of worked in the reverse way, but we'll see. My fingers crossed that something works out here for me, and it's all written.
Well, and it's great. That's certainly evidence for what I think we're going to dive into, which is you're creating your own reality. It's just that Joe believes that these are good signs of good fortune and auspiciousness, and you actually have this impending sense of doom for some reason around 11-11, but we can unpack it.
All right,
I'm gonna love this.
You're a powerful creator, like Joe said.
Except he's creating the opposite of what he wants to create unintentionally.
There we go. Let's get into it.
So, David, and maybe you're holistic in this sense, but if you ever have like a muscle ache or a headache, what brand of aspirin or Tylenol are you taking?
Well, this is, you know, you're working against my family name, because I'd like to say Bayer. but I'm more of an ibuprofen Advil kind of guy, because if I do have a headache and I do take meds, I want to get rid of that thing as quickly as possible.
Yeah. All right, fair enough. You knew exactly where I was going with that.
I knew where you were going.
All right, so we talked a little bit about this before we started the call, but you attended Columbia University. You also were a prolific high school basketball star. You played basketball at Columbia University. What did you study at Columbia, Ivy League school? And was this a scenario where you went there because you were a good basketball player and you got the Ivy League education? Or is it a scenario where you could have played basketball maybe at a more competitive school, but you decided, hey, this is something where the academics are going to pay off in the long term?
I had solid basketball skills. I thought about, it was really between UCLA and Columbia. And I think I probably would have had a good chance to walk on at UCLA. I don't know how much, playing time I would have gotten. But what I realized when I was playing at Columbia, that was a real transition, that this wasn't, it really wasn't who I was. I think a lot of it was, I'm 6'8", maybe 6'7" after a couple of herniated discs. And so I was just sort of led to go in and, play basketball. It was the thing to do, and I was pretty good at it. But, to be fully honest, like, I didn't love banging around with the big guys underneath the hoop, so I there was a lot of transition that took place for me, in college and beyond. I played up until my junior year, and then I had an injury that just required too much therapy in order for me to want to stay in the game. But I also wanted a high level of education. I thought that I was going to write screenplays, which I may do someday, and create movies. But I ended up getting into comparative literature, creative writing, philosophy. And I didn't know it at that time, but I could see how that sort of set the stage for the work that I'm doing, today.
So the foundational work was created then. What we want to do is we want to kind of condense everything that you've done over the course of your career into one question. So you're the president of popwall.com, director of business development at Ducati Motorcycles, Broadband National, and the president of DataBanq, right? So walk us through your time after Columbia, the initial process of what you did afterwards, and step by step at all those places that I just mentioned.
I started a business right out of college. It was in 1998. There was one place that we went to in the city where we would buy all the cool stuff for our dorm rooms. And I had this idea of putting this guy's inventory on the internet and building an e-commerce site and getting reps at colleges across the country. And so I put together a business plan. I pitched some early venture companies. Nobody really bit. My dad liked the idea. He invested in it. So for about a year and a half, I built this online e-commerce store that, got to a point that it was doing low six figures in business. But I played a collectible card game called Magic the Gathering, which is kind of Pokemon for nerdy adults. And at a tournament, I met the general manager of Ducati North America. And so we ended up building this friendship, and he says, you have this nice e-commerce business, but, we're going to start up Ducati.com and sell the first motorcycle on the internet. Like, why don't you let your partner keep running this business and come to Italy and help us? We don't know what we're doing on the internet. So it was an amazing opportunity. And I went. My partner kept running our e-commerce business. Eventually, I just divested myself of it completely, and I went over to Italy, led the internet strategy for that business, obviously a great brand. And we sold the first motorcycle on the internet. We did $70 million in 2 years. We were the 7th highest grossing e-commerce site in all of Europe. And it was an amazing experience. And I leveraged that to come back to the States and was doing some consulting that was internet based, because the internet was still very early in 2002, 2003, 2004. And in 2005, I started getting into search engine optimization. So I was smoking a lot of pot. I was studying patterns in search engine results. And I sort of discovered local search before it was a thing. And I hired a web developer to build me a mortgage lead generation website that had a page for every city in the country. And within 90 days, I was generating $100,000, $200,000 a month in mortgage leads. And so I took that model and I raised $4 million for the company you mentioned called DataBanq, which was a search engine optimized financial services lead generation network. And around 2009, when the markets tanked, Google was getting smarter. And so it became more complex to consistently rank across all of those terms. And what was coming to a head was my drug, my alcohol, and my pornography addiction. So there was sort of this vector intersect between me wanting to be successful and chasing success that I realized in hindsight was to feel better about myself, and never really resolving all of the emotions and the traumas that were driving that behavior, and then having money, right? And having exposure to substances and to women and to the internet. And so that was really like the turning point in my life was when I started working a 12-step program and we can certainly talk about like all the things that emerged as a result of that. But, you know, it was 10 years of really focusing on being a success in business, and then a major breakdown, and then a transition and really trying to be successful as a human being.
Yeah, and a lot of your career took you all over the place. So I'm sure different places had, more challenges than others. Some of the places you lived, I mean, you lived in some of the most major places that are hot spots in the world, really. So you mentioned Italy, you lived in New York for college, you spent some time in Orlando in the swamp down there with the alligators. Now you're in Puerto Rico. So give us some pros and cons to each of those stops along your journey.
Italy was a blur. And again, I think you give a young person a lot of responsibility, an exorbitant amount at that time of money and access. You know, I look back and, it was, people always say, well, that must have been an incredible experience. And it was like, well, yeah, but I wasn't really present to it. I could have seen a lot of Europe at that time. I didn't. I was working and I was partying. That was pretty much it. Orlando was a great transition for me, and I like Orlando. It's sort of like a Starbucks. You always know what you're going to get when you go back to Orlando. There's nothing particularly remarkable about it, but it was a great home base. And then as we built the company we have today, David Bear Businesses and Whole Human, we're doing seminars all over the world. And so it's this integrated experience where my wife and I are building something that we're passionate about that's incredibly lucrative for us, while we're able to help other people and go to Antigua, Guatemala, or Lake Louise, Canada, or the Four Seasons, Lake Tahoe, or Vail, or Colorado Springs, or God, we've done so many events in Mexico. We took a group of 50 people from one of our programs to India in April of this year. A few years ago, we went to Machu Picchu. And so now, like we really are living this extraordinary life. And the thing I really appreciate is it's not like I'm trying to get a bunch of shit done so that I can then go live my life. But, by the grace of a higher power, like it has become my life. And some of that was intentional, right? Through the work that I did, really getting clear that my life wasn't working and what I didn't like about my life, springboarded me into having, I think, a level of clarity about what I wanted to create. And the things that, Joseph started to open up around, 11/11, like understanding that I'm a powerful creator and how powerful the mind is, and that we can create whatever life, or vision that we have. So it's been an amazing ride. And I think it's just going to keep getting more and more exciting. And I did get to take my wife back to Italy once I was sober and experience it. And it's just one of the most beautiful, enjoyable places I've ever been to in the world. By the way, we left New York off the list, but going to school in New York, in the city, at Columbia, as an Orange County, California kid was an unbelievable experience. If you've ever been up to the Columbia College campus, you're right in the middle of Upper West Side. You're just before you hit Harlem and Morningside Heights. But when you're on campus, you feel like you're in this bubble. And it's awesome. The history there, at that time, the education that I got, the people I went to school with, I feel very, very fortunate to have the experience that I had in my life, even though there were some really challenging things that I went through as well.
Yeah, the upper area of Manhattan kind of seems to be its own entity itself. That's
Absolutely
different than the other 5 boroughs. It's very, very weird. It's hard to explain to somebody who hasn't been a part of that. But we'll get to more fun stuff in a minute. Want to talk to you about your time as CEO for chamberofcommerce.com.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as I was building this financial services lead generation network, one of the things that we became very, very good at was search engine optimization. And there were these domains or these website URLs that were just sort of sitting dormant, that were great names. They had a lot of authority as far as Google was concerned. And there was one in particular, chamberofcommerce.com, that a lot of sites were linking to as if it was the US Chamber. And so I spoke at a domain development conference, sharing at that time my expertise around search engine optimization. And a gentleman came up to me at the end of my talk and said, hey, I want to work out a deal where you develop out my domains. And so that was a really cool project, because it was basically a landing page that so many sites on the internet were linking to. And we utilized the technology that we had developed to basically turn it into a big yellow pages with, 100,000 business listings and 30,000 cities. And man, that thing lit up like a Christmas tree. I mean, it went from generating a couple thousand visitors a month to a couple million visitors a month within a couple of months. And so that was a really cool experience. I exited out of that relationship. In fact, I was able to sell the contract to a former employee of mine, which was part of my transition, as I was like, hey, I'm kind of done trying to make money off the internet. I want to go do something that feels a little bit more meaningful and that actually helps people and makes the world a better place. Because that whole model was show up in search results, somebody clicks on a search result, lands on your website, and then you hope they click on an ad that Google's running on your website to go somewhere else, right? So you're basically just an intermediary. There wasn't anything inherently valuable in the work that we were doing, so as opposed to the work that we're doing today.
A lot for us to think about, Joe, if we launch youknowimright.com and figuring out how we want to play that up there. But you make that transition from being in the internet game, it's sleazy, it's all about the click-throughs and everything like that, to now you're going to do some meaningful work. So how did you make that transition to becoming a life coach? What was the process like for you to feel comfortable in your own skin of being able to communicate with people and talk about your past experiences? How did you make the transition then to doing those public speaking engagements? Any nerves there? And ultimately, Joe mentioned at the top, becoming an author, writing your book. What was that process like there?
Yeah, for me, there's been nerves the whole time. So, I met my wife in 2012, and that was as I had like a year and a half of sobriety under my belt. I hadn't been in a relationship for probably 5 years. And it was actually around Christmas time that year that I had made a decision that I was going to meet a beautiful Colombian woman and make her my wife. And about 11 days later, I met Carol in Sarasota, Florida, who's from Bogota.
Joe, keep that in mind. You're looking for a beautiful Hispanic woman as well. So
it all comes down to a decision. And I had just been working on myself. I was working a 12-step program, which is an incredible technology for becoming more self-aware. And then I got into personal growth. And then I felt like I got stuck in personal growth. I was like, well, I know all this stuff and I've had some incremental improvements in my life, but especially when I turned to like different spiritual teachings, I read the Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, the promises of scripture, whether it's the Quran or the Bible or the Eastern teachings, metaphysics. It was this idea. Napoleon Hill has got the best-selling business book in the history of the world, right? What's the book about? It's not about business at all. It's about how thoughts create your reality. And so I knew that I was getting stuck somewhere in between. Like I had done this personal growth stuff, but there were still some patterns of thinking, patterns of emotions that I wasn't able to change. And so I kept experiencing these patterns of experiences in my life. There'd be some change, but I'd hit the upper ceiling and drop back down. Good things would happen, but they wouldn't stay very long. And so I just really became obsessed, kind of like I had with everything else in my life, with human potential and with understanding as best as I could how reality works. Einstein says reality is an illusion, albeit a persistent one. And so, we experience reality through our five senses, but you could go back to 6th grade science class. Like Joe ain't even there. Joe's made up of a bunch of atoms, which are mostly space, yet we experience a very physical Joe. So I just really wanted to understand how it all worked. And as I pursued a deeper understanding, I developed distinctions that were helping me in my life, and I'd start sharing them with other people. And so my wife was watching this and she says, you're really impacting your friends' lives. I'm like, no, we're just having dinner. She's like, no, like so-and-so came in with this issue and now I don't think they have that issue anymore. And then people started just saying, hey, that conversation we had really impacted me, and sharing with me the change that they had. And then it really occurred when I came home from Orlando International Airport to downtown Orlando. Carol was walking my Chihuahua Dexter down at the bottom of our condo, and I got out of the car, and the Uber driver came out crying and gave me a hug and said, you've changed my life forever. And I just helped him see that he had these limiting beliefs, that he had to get all these things done before he could be present for his children, rather than realizing that by being present for his children, he'd be able to get all these things done. And that's what happens. We get it backwards. And so we end up missing out on life and missing out on, the promise that in many ways we can have it all. So my wife encouraged me to do a 1-day workshop. I invited some people and friends of friends, and 23 people showed up in a classroom in Winter Park, Florida back in 2014. And I taught everything that I knew at that time. And I took people through some exercises and some awarenesses and some tools. And I said, thanks. And I just started gathering my stuff at the podium. And there was a line of 23 people who all came up to me and said, this changed my life forever. So we decided, look, I think we need to create, I guess, what people would call a business out of this. And so we took a lot of courses, tried a lot of things. In 2015, 2016, it felt like nothing was working. We almost gave up. And then we decided we wanted to do a live event. We hired a consultant to help coach us on how to fill a live event. And the consultant said, listen, your goal should be 50 people who come to your live event. And we ended up having our first live event with 350 people. And then at the next event, we had 550 people. And at the next event, we had 810 people. And then at the event, the weekend COVID hit, we had 1,200 people. And what we found was that the journey I had gone through, and by the way, Nick, like I think I've always been really transparent and authentic. I just, certainly after 12 step, I just don't know how else to be. I don't feel like there's anything to, be ashamed of. And it's pretty cool. Like when I talk about my sex addiction or my pornography addiction, when I speak on stage, like I spoke to at a Raymond James annual event of financial advisors, dudes will come up to me afterwards and say, hey, I'm struggling with that. Okay, cool. Like now we're in conversation and I can point them to some resources. But whether it's my limiting beliefs or whether it's my substance abuse, it's just always been who I am. But I've felt friction the entire way. Every step of this journey has been incredibly uncomfortable for me. Right. From stepping on stage in front of 350 people and running my first 3-day live event, like never having done it before, to, writing my first book and putting it out there and, still having that part of me that wonders if it's good enough or if I'm going to be criticized, to what I'm doing right now with my podcast. We launched our podcast just a couple of months ago, and I go through the same things everybody else goes through in terms of the inner dialogue. I understand it. I've developed a relationship with it. And so most of the time it doesn't deter me from doing the things that I want to do in order to become the person that I envision for myself. I hope that was clear.
No, it was very, very clear. So I want to start talking more about the relationship that you have with your wife as a partner, right, in all facets of life. And this kind of leads me into the next question that we have here on our rundown about the law of attraction. You said you were going to meet your wife, right? And then very shortly happened. It actually happened right after, right? So that only happens when you have such a concrete, solid vision of what you actually want in your life. And it seems to me, just by talking about your business and the purpose of your business, it seems like she is there for you basically in all regards. She's exactly what you want to be. So talk to us about going into business with her, the presence that she has in your life from the time that you met her up until now.
Yeah. So we all have special skills, and I believe that every single person. And my special skill is I have a way of taking these complex concepts around how the universe works, or how our limiting beliefs work, and distilling it down into frameworks that people can access and understand in a deeper way. Carol's has a lot of skill sets, but one of those is faith. So she's been a real mentor and teacher for me in terms of believing in myself, believing when there isn't necessarily evidence to justify the belief. And she still coaches me on it. In the Bible, Moses was told by the burning bush to go and speak to Pharaoh and tell Pharaoh that he had to let the Hebrews go. And Moses said, hey, like, that's not me. I can't do that. He wasn't particularly gifted with speech. And he's like, hey, don't worry. I'll give you Aaron. Your brother's an incredible orator. And so he'll help you and he'll speak to Pharaoh on your behalf. Like Carol was my Aaron who showed up, because I didn't come from a faith-based background. And so much of what we're creating together now is precedes any evidence that could possibly support the vision that we have. When I met Carol, I had 2 homes in foreclosure and around $2,500 in my bank account. in a business that looked like it was going to go under. There was no evidence for me deciding that I was going to have an incredibly abundant, prosperous life, that I was going to have a private plane, that I was going to have a dream home in Puerto Rico, that I was going to, any of the things that were material or immaterial, that anything that I would say would matter to thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people. So she's always been reminding me of that. She's also an incredible business operator. So, there's no coincidence that we came together with this common vision of creating what we've created, because I could never do the operational things that she's doing, and she could never do the coaching things or like a lot of the curriculum things that I'm doing. Although she's been a major part of the design of some of our frameworks too. Oftentimes she's like, "Hey, I have a message for you." She's like, "I don't know what it means, but you need to know what it is." I remember before one of my big events, she drew it out on a flip chart. She's like, "I'm not sure what this is, but it kind of came to me in my meditation." And it was exactly what I was looking for as a missing piece in the frameworks that I was teaching. So we're definitely a unified soul. And, we also, we challenge each other. We challenge each other consciously and unconsciously. So, all of my shit comes up with more with my wife than anyone else, my wife and my business. And I trigger her. And when you actually understand that that's a good thing, because what's coming to the surface is what's inside of you, that it's not that your partner's doing anything wrong, but that there's something inside of you that's ready to be healed or transformed or expanded upon, then you're able to navigate through those things and really grow. And that was a big shift for me. I think a lot of what I was looking for before I met Carol, and like my pre-Carol Gutierrez Bear days, I just wanted somebody who would agree with everything that I would say, who was, easy, sweet, compliant, but I wouldn't trade those dynamics that I have with Carol for the world. And recently I've been really focused on, what do I need to do to be more of a man in our relationship? There's a whole body of work around really taking ownership of your masculine, of making your partner or your woman feel safe so that she can be free to be feminine, of really stepping into my king. And that's not where I came from. You know what I mean? Like, my dad wasn't a king. I didn't have king role modelship. Most of us men don't. And so that's a whole nother part of my journey that's emerging. But, being able to be in business with my wife, and to be able to, sometimes it's funny to call it a business, right? Like, to be creating this vision together and this mission together, man, it's such a blessing. It's such a blessing, because we have a lot of people who get into our coaching programs where the thing is like, hey, my partner's not really on board with this. They're not really in alignment with it. And we're able to coach them through that, to work on what the trigger is inside of them in that experience. And oftentimes it opens up their partner to change, and the partner does align. But I'm very, very fortunate that we have a shared vision.
And those Central and South American women, they're tough. They're very, very tough. So
yeah. Well, it's cultural, right? I mean, Carol came over here with, her story was $20 in a suitcase and her mom. And, Carol was one of 7 people admitted in her class to the top engineering school. She was the only girl in Colombia. She's brilliant. She's a hard worker. She was on the collegiate water polo team. You can imagine like how tenacious you have to be to do water polo. And so, but they wanted a better life. So they come over to the Sarasota, Bradenton area of Florida. And she gets a job working at 7-Eleven, speaking no English. And she talked about how the night she would go home and cry because, someone would come in and yell at her because she didn't understand the flavor of the pack of cigarettes that they were asking for. And we see that, right, with so many immigrants. It's like they excel at what they're doing, and then they have to come over here and take the jobs that most of us wouldn't want or would be unwilling to take. But it's actually working through that process that allows them to become so dominant, eventually in business, in leadership, in whatever it is, in their expertise. So yeah, she's pretty amazing. Tough ladies.
Of course, absolutely. I love hearing that. And it seems like one of those things that you're continuously working on is achieving that perfect balance. Now, perfection, it's something that you always chase. Ideally, you want it, you never really attain it. But I want to talk conceptually about balance, because I think one of the biggest things regarding the understanding of the universe is balance. Yin yang, black and white, hot, cold, right? Everything that Katy Perry sang about. But I want to talk about specifically, because in your book you mention specifically your parents. You said your mother was a worrier and your dad kind of just never worried about anything. He always had the answer to everything, right? So in that sense, it seems like opposite attract, right? So walk Nick and I through, and our listeners, about how understanding how polarity works, how opposites work, is incredibly important to what we do here and to achieving a higher level of understanding, so to speak.
So using the example of my mom and my dad, yeah, my mom and my dad attracted each other because everything is energy. And they had a lot of unprocessed wounds and trauma. So my mom came from a mother who left Nazi Latvia at that time. She married my mom's father, who was in the military. So she was a war bride. But what I understand is that my grandmother literally told my mom that, you know, she was worthless and she wished that she was never born. So my mom never felt like she was good enough, and she was a people pleaser, and she always worried that she was going to do something wrong. And so that was a perfect match for my dad, who was a critical thinker, judgmental, problem finder, problem solver. His dad was the kind of guy who there was a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things, and the right way to do thing was whatever my grandfather decided. So there was no logic to it. And so my dad adopted those programs from his dad. So both of my parents are adopting these programs, and they're a perfect match. To your point, there's a balance. But what was matching was dissonant energy, right? My mom feeling like she's not worthy, attracting a husband that would make her feel unworthy. And then my dad had the opposite match, a similar type of, you know, parallel with my mom. I'd have to say, you know, my dad never felt like he was doing enough, and my mom would constantly nag him or ask him to do more. And eventually that created their separation. What we want to do is we want to be able to heal those kind of limiting beliefs or childhood traumas or programs that are dissonant into their resonant forms. You know, the reason why I think I'm as vulnerable as I am, and I care about people as much as I do, and I have an open heart, is because that's the resonant form of what my mom was struggling with. You know, she wanted to be good for other people, but felt like she was never good enough. She loves and cares about people, but was always afraid that she would be criticized. And so I got the same thing from my dad, right? Like, I was a critical thinker, but over time, critical thinkers become critical people. And so, and I was critical on myself. And what that's taught me to do is to be able to relax a little bit more, to not be so tight in how I use my analytical mind, to be a little bit more faith-based, and to trust a little bit more people and life. So, you know, I think that each and every one of us have come into this life who gets led to personal growth and spiritual awareness to transform these dissonant energies that are programs that have been passed on from generation to generation and generation and generation. And the universe is balanced, to your point. So if you're holding limiting beliefs, or you haven't, you know, processed or fully metabolized experiences from your childhood that we may call traumas, then you're going to be attracting circumstances and situations in your life that are going to reflect those limiting beliefs: low self-esteem, money's hard to make, there's not enough time, you can't trust people, back to you. But that's actually a really good thing, because when you understand how the game works, you realize that these experiences you're having are not causing you to feel or think a certain way. You've been thinking and feeling this way for a long, long time, which is why you created this experience. And so people say to me, well, look, if my beliefs are creating my reality, which, like, that's not the groundbreaking, you know, announcement that David Baer has, right? Napoleon Hill can do that one. Or you can go back to, you know, to scripture, right? In Romans, be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Or you shall reap what you sow. Like, these things have been around forever. But if you were to say, hey, I know I'm creating my own reality through my thoughts, and we can talk about how that works, how do I become more aware of the thoughts that are creating the experiences that I don't like? I would say, well, notice the experiences you don't like and pay attention to your reaction to them. because your reaction to them is actually what caused the experience. It's not an effect of the experience. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. We got to make it make sense to Nick. So let's close the circle here because I
Yeah.
want to finish off with Nick, and then we'll start to wrap this up. So how can we get Nick to buy into the fact that just because you don't see results necessarily appearing in your reality, that you are on the right track, that you are aligned, that the decisions that you are making are aligned with who you are and what your purpose is, and even though you're not quite there yet, you're on your way there. How can we get him to appreciate the journey as opposed to the destination, and all that?
Well, I think we want to formulate the right question. Are we wanting Nick to believe more in the power of the imagination and the magic of life and the science of synchronicity? Or are we wanting Nick to enjoy his life more? Because Nick would first have to tell me he's not enjoying the journey and he's too focused on the outcome, right? So those are two very different prescriptive things. If somebody is saying, hey, I want to learn how to enjoy the journey more, I'm so focused on the outcome, that's one answer. If another person says, hey, I'd like to be open to the idea that there's a magic to life and to understand how this infinite intelligence works in and around me so that I can operate more in alignment with it and create more in my life, that's a different conversation. What do you think it is? Or we can ask Nick.
I think Nick loves his life. He recently became a father. His wife is an amazing human being. His family is amazing. We've got great friends. So I think on a day-to-day basis, he enjoys his life. Like I said, I think it's just more about him taking like a little of that pressure off, because he wants to see this thing like succeed in the worst way, and he wants to see it blow up, and he wants to see all the fruits of his labor.
So one of the things I would, if I was going to teach one equation that was going to guide you in effective operation in your life, it would be this equation, which if we have time to unpack, we unpack it. If we don't, we don't. I've got a whole podcast episode on a changed mind. I think it's episode 3 that breaks this down. But it's this equation. If we're going to simplify everything, desire plus non-resistance equals desired result. So if you have a desire and you don't have any resistance to it, you'll have thoughts in alignment with that desire that'll catalyze emotions inside of you, that'll motivate action. And so you'll be taking aligned, intelligent action that, if given enough time, is 100% guaranteed to produce the desired result. It doesn't matter if Henry Ford wanted to create the automobile. It doesn't matter if Elon Musk wants to send rockets to Mars. It doesn't matter if David Baer wants to become president of the United States in 2032. It doesn't really matter what it is. Desire plus non-resistance equals desired result. And that's not some sort of like new age woo-woo. That's a fundamental understanding, number one, of how behavioral psychology works, that your brain is a goal-achieving machine, and it's operating in very practical ways off of what you believe. And it's also a metaphysical understanding that we hold vibration inside of us, and the emotions that we experience are catalyzing coincidences and synchronicities in our life. And so we're either in a resistant vibration or we're in a coherent vibration. And so that would open up the conversation for Nick, because anytime you're feeling resistance, you're moving into some form of a negative emotion, right? Stress, anxiety, boredom. And so we're being counterproductive to the materialization of the desire, right? And so that's a really good starting point. And the other thing is, and this isn't really about Nick, right? But it's for anyone who says, I'm open to this. There's such a power to it. I'm open to thinking differently. I want to know if this is real, if this is true. I'd like to find a better way to create even more without the hustle, without the grind, without the stress, without the anxiety, without the overwhelm. Now, we're not talking about you sit at home with a bag of cheesy poofs between your legs and just expect $1 million to show up at your front door. That's not what I'm talking about. But there's a more elegant way to be creating in our life, in alignment with this extraordinary intelligence that governs the environment, it governs the solar systems, it governs our bodies, it governs everything. And I think that that's an important investment to make for anybody who wants to do more, be more, have more, and to experience the journey in a more joyful way.
Nick, are you convinced yet or no?
We'll see what the universe says. I mean, these things take time.
It's great. I love it. I love it. That sounds like massive progress.
Yeah, no, he's almost there.
It all depends on the zodiac sign and the moon, right, Joe?
Oh yeah, that's right. I'm an astrology guy, Dave. If you haven't figured that out, I am a kooky person. So I like to ask the astrology sign for specific guests. So recently, I've kind of just stumbled into people's birthday, so it wasn't really like a true guess or anything. Um, but your zodiac sign, right? I'm trying to. I don't know. Nick, let's Nick guess first because
Are
Nick
you
guesses
are
a lot of
you
them
oh
right.
you're trying to tune into it? I got you. Okay.
Yeah. Nick, what do you think his zodiac sign is? Because you're the one who always guesses this correct on the first shot. I can't figure out how he does it.
I really don't know. I'm gonna guess. I'll just go with a Leo. I don't know.
No.
You got it. It's
Oh,
Nick
get out of
Really?
again, ladies
here!
and
No,
Get
gentlemen.
out of here.
Nick again. It's Nick
Wow.
again.
no clue, John. No,
I'm a July Leo.
A July Leo.
Well,
Interesting.
look, this closes the loop where we started it, where Joe said, "Look, Nick is so in tune, he just doesn't actually realize it
He
yet."
doesn't realize it.
Right,
He's
right,
a 33 life path and he
right.
doesn't even realize what he was blessed with. It's
I love it.
unbelievable. He he thinks he stumbles onto everything. I don't think he stumbles onto everything. I just think it's like you're like he gets fed information and he doesn't even realize he's getting fed the information. You
Very
know,
powerful. Very
it is
powerful.
very powerful. He doesn't realize how powerful it is. It's our job to convince him how powerful he is.
It's very powerful, Nick. Are you convinced?
How powerful Gemini, I guess.
Yeah.
That's
There you are. There you are.
So
I
the
love
other thing
it.
that's powerful is what everybody who's successful or has made it in some point to happiness in their life. A powerful question they have to ask themselves and answer is, what is your I'm right moment? What I mean by that is a time or place, David, where you wanted to ask somebody for advice. You wanted to pursue something. They said, don't do that. That's a terrible idea. That'll never work. And you say to them, you know what? I'm going to do it anyway. And ultimately, you will see why it is that I'm right.
Boy, that's a really tough one for me, Nick. I feel like I've been so fortunate to have champions around me throughout my whole life. In fact, I get those Instagram reels where someone's yelling at someone about, the people aren't going to go along with you and they're not going to agree with you and you got to just go get new friends and and I'm like, I can't think of anyone, even my parents, with what I've shared with you in terms of their programs and how they operated. And God bless them, I love both my parents, were hesitantly endorsing of almost everything that I did. Man, yeah, I don't have a I'll show you type of moment with anyone. I think the big one right now, it hasn't happened yet, is that I told my dad back in 2010 that I was going to do something great that was going to be historic, like become president of the United States. And my dad probably doesn't remember this conversation, but somehow Mark Zuckerberg came up earlier in the conversation. And my dad said, well, I'd probably put my money on Mark Zuckerberg for that one than over you. And in 2015, when Donald Trump was announced president of the United States, I clearly heard a voice in the room, as if someone was in the room. This goes more into Joe's category than Nick's category, but I heard a voice in the room that said, if he can win, then you can win. And I walked into my wife's bedroom, our bedroom. She was in the room and she was on her computer. I said, Donald Trump just was announced as president, next president. He won the election. And she looks up from her computer and she says, if he can win, then you can win. I said, why did you just say that to me? She says, I don't really know. So since 2015, we've been certain that in 2032, I'm going to run for and become president of the United States. And our focus has become creating a hugely profitable company, which we're in the process of doing, and an awakened coalition of people who really want to change the world and to support the transition of the current structure from a top-down, bottom-up strategy. And so, yeah, we'll see. I hope my dad's around for the inauguration in 2033, so he can be sitting there in the White House lawn. And there might be a wink, which is a little bit of a "I told you so" that might take place at that point. We'll see.
Well, David, if you are president, is there a chance in 2033 that we could do an episode with you of I'm right from the Oval Office?
I will tell you that if I am, you're the first person who's asked that, and if I am president of the United States, I 100%. You still have this podcast going. I will 100% come back and do an interview with you.
Oh, You're gonna want us in your corner. Nick, what is your birthday?
Yeah.
We're Mr. American Podcast here. My birthday is May 25th, Memorial Day.
Yeah.
And I'm
Beautiful.
July 4th.
My favorite holiday. That
There
and
you go.
Halloween. Yeah, I love it. You guys are my patriotic teammates, so I appreciate that.
There you
We're
go.
gonna do this. We just need Nick to start believing it, because we know if Nick can believe it, then it's gonna happen.
There you go. Absolutely love it. David, we appreciate your time. This was a lot of fun. Nick is well on his way. I think he's more of a believer now than he was going in. We had a lot of fun with you. We wish you the best of luck in all your future endeavors and what you got going on. You will become president one day. You first heard it on this show. It's breaking news. We're 9 years ahead of it, but it will happen. But what we do here, David, is we give our guests the last words. So if there's anything else you would personally like to share or promote on behalf of yourself, by all means, go ahead. But once again, we appreciate your time. Thank you for doing this with us.
I appreciate both you guys. Joe, you spoke to it before. I did come out with my first book this year, which is A Changed Mind. I poured everything into it. So for anybody who really wants to understand this personal growth game at a new level, to not just become aware, but go beyond self-awareness, to change your brain and to re-engineer your reality, A Changed Mind is it's a fantastic read. And the other thing is, if, people want to get on our newsletter or check out more about, what we're up to, our annual event, or anything that they're doing, how they can go deeper into this work, they can go to davidbayer.com, subscribe to our newsletter, links on over to, our podcast, A Changed Mind. And it's been really just an honor to be here with you guys. I really appreciate the opportunity.
We appreciate the time, David. I saw Joe is just signing up for the newsletter right now. Would not be surprised if Joe is at your next event in Texas in February, right? So
that's right.
How can people sign up for that if they want to go?
February 23rd. Yeah, so we've got the event site, powerfullivingexperience.com. It was named a top 3 must-attend personal development event by Inc. magazine. It's an unbelievable transformational experience. And there's nothing like, putting yourself in a compressed environment, an immersive experience for 3 days, both for learning and for transformation. And I got to get Joe right up in the front row, jumping up and down with the rest of us.
Oh, you know it. That's his way. That's his MO. He's been to a bunch of conferences. He's always had a great time.
Perfect.
I'm sure he'd have a great experience at yours. David, this has been amazing. We thank you so much for your time. That's going to do it here for this episode of You Know I'm Right, for our very special guest, David Bayer, from my co-host, Joe Calabrese. I'm Nick Durst, and this has been You Know I'm Right.